Morning, everyone. Today we are talking about financial literacy and asset-based engagement. So welcome to our Graduation Equity webinar series. I'm Jocelyn Nunez, Student Engagement and Support Program Supervisor, and I am filling in for Kepi Anderson. And today we're talking about financial literacy and asset-based engagement. This meeting is being recorded and should be available in the next couple of days on our YouTube channel. And of course, closed captions are available in the menu if you would like to take advantage of that. This PowerPoint is also posted on the OSPI Graduation Equity webinar page. And if you'd like to follow along, we'll also be dropping the slides and our resource page throughout the webinar. All right, so we've gotten some feedback that you all want to know who is here. So if you'd like to, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't done so already, with your name, your role, your district, and of course, telling us a little bit about what you're curious about learning today. Nice. We've got Olympia, Evergreen. That's awesome. All right. Well, I hope that as more people chime in the chat, we're able to cover that throughout the webinar. And if not, please feel free to use our Q&A function to ask any questions, especially as we queue up and speak to our panelists today, and of course, our keynote speaker. It's awesome. This webinar is brought to you through the Office of Student Engagement and Support at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. And at OSPI, we believe that each student needs to be prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. The Graduation Equity webinar series was created with the purpose of highlighting practices that increase access to education and ultimately graduation. So through our webinars, we are striving to think critically about historical context and the opportunities we have to get curious and dismantle policies and practices that don't necessarily always serve our youth. We want to ensure we make it possible for each student to have access to the instruction and supports that they need to make them successful in school and in life. I want to go ahead and share this ancestral lands overlapping map. I like this map because it is more informative about the lands we live on in Washington and provides us additional context for our communities to consider. The nuance of seeing these lands are often shared by multiple groups and that the borders overlap. And we ask our participants today to honor the traditional lands on which each of you are located today. And we'll go ahead and paste some links in the chat to help. Recently, I find myself traveling around the intersections of the traditional lands of the Cowlitz and Yakima tribes. I would like to acknowledge the indigenous people who have stewarded this land since time immemorial and who still live here today. If you don't know it already, it's important for us to remember we all have direct and indirect impacts in the lives of our students, our families, and our communities. Considering today's topic, I want us to think about the various exchanges we have when interacting with our students, our families, especially about the state of our economy, perhaps how it may even be affecting them personally, and the opportunities for us to have enriching conversations about financial mobility. Our students aren't just students. They may also be providers in their household, and there are implications and expectations that come alongside that. Providing financial literacy education doesn't just serve our students directly, it has the power of changing generations. And one way we can support that is by having early and transparent conversations about money. We have all heard the saying, money is not everything in life, but it is the currency that provides the means for changing the quality of life we want to lead. In today's webinar, we hope you walk away understanding data-driven options for investing and in implementing financial education for both students and educators that are tactical and actionable. We also hope that you recognize what professional development and instructional materials are available today for Washington educators, administrators, school professionals, and families. That you learn from local leaders on the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as trauma-informed practices within financial education. And that you learn from a district leader how they're implementing financial education at the district level. Joining us today is Amy Cleaver from Financial Education Elementary Program Supervisor working with Financial Education Public-Private Partnership, and Dr. Carly Urban, Professor of Economics at Montana State University. We will also be introducing our panelists later on. We like to get to know our audience so that we can tailor our content to your needs, and we are using our polls to take attendance for clock hours. So thank you in advance for participating. It's always nice to know who is here, who is present, and who is engaging with us in the chat, and gauging how familiar you are with this topic. We have quite a few counselors, community liaison, attendance liaisons, graduation specialists. It's awesome. We're in middle to high school and a little bit of elementary, and some are in both. Some people are saying both. Some people are very familiar, somewhat familiar, and some it's new. So we hope that you take some cool takeaways from today's webinar. I will go ahead and hand it off to my colleague, Amy Cleaver.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. And thank you to Student Engagement and Support for the opportunity to be here and talk to you all about financial education, which is so critically important to our students. It is part of the conversation in our state and nationally right now. It's an educational conversation a lot of people are having and seeing the value in. And so today I would like to start by inviting you all here to reach back and remember, what was your first spending experience? I know mine. I very much distinctly remember I had earned quarters. So that was my first earning experience as well. And I remember that those quarters felt so big in my hand as a kid. And I remember like the responsibility of what am I going to spend these quarters on? So for my first earning and spending experience, cash was involved. And as we look at the list on the right, which was a very humbling list to create, I'm just going to say, you can see that our students belong to a generation that are going to be having very different foundational experiences in spending than we did. So I always like to start my trainings with an invitation to consider how you learned about money, or perhaps how you didn't, and hold space for the recognition that our financial landscape has really changed. And we are trying to teach that quote unquote value of a dollar lesson in what is now a digital spending world. So I would like to point out that Gen Z is the only generation to be online for their entire lives. If you're in the millennial section, you may be like me and make most of your purchases online and rarely make a purchase without reading an online review. In addition, as we manage this digital world, over half of our teenagers spend at least 4 hours a day on a variety of social media apps. Maybe you do too, no judgment. And social media is designed first and foremost to encourage spending. So as we go into this webinar and we talk about what is financial education, I hope we start some conversations during this webinar that recognize that financial education is no longer just balancing a checkbook. That isn't preparing our students for the challenges that they will face in the real world. But what it is an amazing opportunity to fold in a bunch of different skills to really empower our students to take control of their financial futures, which leads to the freedom to pursue their dreams. So I'm very excited to start this conversation and to hear from Dr. Carly Urban and from all of you later in the panel. There we go. So I would like to introduce the Financial Education Public-Private Partnership, or FEP. As I mentioned, my name is Amy Klewer. I am the Elementary Program Supervisor with FEP. Excuse me. So one of the major things I would love for you to take away from this webinar is that FEP is here, that we have existed, we do exist, and we are prepared to help districts and sites implement or increase the amount of financial education their students and educators and staff are receiving. So who are we? As you can see, we have existed since 2004 as the little engine that could, formed by the Washington State Legislature in order to, with the goal of bringing together public and private partnerships, public and private stakeholders to increase access to financial education for our K-12 public school students. This is a model completely unique to Washington. Nobody else, as popular as the topic of financial education is right now, no other state in the country is doing what we do. So it's very exciting. And we are sort of on the cutting edge of really making a state commitment from the legislative level to financial education. Over the years, we have developed state standards and a FEP Fellows programs of peer-to-peer instructional coaches and mentors across the state. And in 2022, our team expanded and has been focused on 4 core responsibilities, which is reviewing financial education instructional materials, K-12, curriculums, lessons, you name it, we will review it. We have developed a robust clearinghouse of these resources, sorted by grade band on our website, and really worked hard to build out those free no and low prep resources for teachers. We also provide professional development and training opportunities at no cost. We aim to increase financial education by providing professional developments to raise teacher self-efficacy and look at ways that financial education can meet the needs of individual districts, sites, and students. And we facilitate an amazing grant that I am going to talk about in just a little bit. SB 5720, it's a fully funded grant that provides funds for every school district to increase financial education through professional development. So who are we? Meet the FEP team. We have our amazing executive director, Tracy Godat. Our director is OSPI institution, Lance Rosinski. I can't go anywhere in that building without somebody who has met Lance in his long career at OSPI. We also have our Associate Director of Financial Education, Ms. Pam Wally, who until recently was a, sorry, I read the chat, and who recently was a professor of economics at Western Washington University and is a pillar in the national economic education scene as well. And myself, like I said, hi, I'm Amy Cleaver. My focus in this work has been financial education and children's literature, how we can teach personal finance skills through children's books. I also work on the connection between social emotional learning and development and financial education. We see a beautiful connection there for real life application of problem solving and decision-making skills. I also am very passionate about digital consumer awareness, but digital consumer awareness in particular. The sneaky math, as a former math teacher, I love the sneaky math that is involved in personal finance. It's math without kids always knowing they're doing math, and standards alignment work. My counterpart, Milady Garcia, works as the Special Population Program Supervisor. So her focus is on curriculums and programs developed for our English language learners, migrant students, foster students, justice-involved youth, unhomed youth, alternative youth, special education students, and Native youth. She also focuses on the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging component of financial education, and as a heritage Spanish speaker has led the charge in developing our high quality, equitably translated Spanish materials. So this is the team, and I really do hope you'll reach out to us. As I mentioned, we're here, we are prepared to help you with your financial education needs. And in that vein, we have been very intentional and purposeful in recognizing that financial education does not stand alone. It can, of course, be a standalone subject, but it can also be folded into so many other academic areas. And so what you see here is just how we have really tried to develop these meaningful partnerships with other programs at OSPI. This is a great example, being here with student engagement and support. Again, with the social emotional learning department, we've our program, we have a standards crosswalk. We are going to work. I saw some of my friends from the school counselors program in here, as well as from Seattle Public Schools school counselors. Hi, guys. We're working, will hopefully be working on a crosswalk with the ASCA benchmarks as well. Just had an amazing conversation with the secondary math program coordinator. So we really believe in developing these partnerships and are open to any connections anyone here in the audience may see moving forward. And with that being said, I want to just point out our website quickly. This is our website, fep.org. The robust clearinghouse I mentioned will be found here on our resources and links section. As you can see, we have focused on grab and go resource collections, social emotional learning. There's a section for special populations. For Spanish-speaking newcomers as well, we have resources on our website, and very much encourage you to please go check it out and sign up for our newsletter so you can hear about the different training opportunities we have. And again, when those grant applications open, you'll be first to hear about them. And I'd love to share an example of what you will find on our website. This would be an example of our financial education and social emotional learning accordion. So as a former classroom educator, we really bring a teacher-centered focus to the materials that we develop. If we put a link in there, it should be a direct link, because I recognize that teachers do not have time to search around for something, no matter how amazing it was. So I always want to make sure that the resources we bring you are easy to access, free or no or low prep, from reputable sources. And all of that information should always be found within our resource collection. You will see my passion project, the Financial Education Public-Private Library, the FEP Financial Education Library, up there in the top right corner, which is a collection of children's books with personal finance and economic themes. And in the bottom right, you will see our YouTube page where we have playlists of PDs that we have done, webinars we have done on different topics, like a social studies and financial education. We have a webinar on K-5, cross curricular opportunities, or even we did one on buying a car, lessons on buying a car and how to roll those out within the classroom. So we invite you to check out that webpage to see what we're about as well. And so this is really our approach. This is the FEP approach. We recognize that financial education is not one size fits all. And we really want you to know that we are here and open to meet the needs of your district, your site, your educators, your students, and to come and fold financial education in wherever it makes sense, is purposeful, and can be impactful. And we'll hear from Dr. Urban in just a minute on some of what the data shows on that, which I think is really interesting. But what I hope you take away from this is just recognizing that we see such potential in financial education to expand our students' experience, their confidence in not just one subject area, but many subject areas. And last, I want to make sure I mention this opportunity, this grant that exists right now that was signed by the governor in 2022, and that's really what led to our staff expansion. This is a non-competitive, fully funded grant available with funds for every student. Any district can apply, right? And it aims to increase our students' financial education through professional development. So through this grant program, you need to districts will set a goal, and the financial education public-private partnership will be here to support, make connections with community partners when appropriate, and provide the professional development and training that you need. So you can see that the year one has been completed. I believe year two grants, I was told by my executive director, should open at the beginning of May. And we did have some legislation we know that was proposed. If you notice, some financial education mandate was proposed this year. The legislative session did close this week without that mandate being passed. And that is really outside even for us at FEP, that's outside our locus of control. We cannot control what the legislature does or doesn't do. But this opportunity is here now, and it's not dependent on whether or not there is a requirement. I don't think we want to necessarily wait for that moment when this is such an important part of our students' money becomes such an important part of everybody's life. So as I said, grant applications are expected to open again in the beginning of May this year, and we are so excited and really hopeful that this is going to be a great platform for us to spread the news about that. All right, and with that being said, I am now going to introduce our keynote speaker. I'm so pleased and honored to be joined by Dr. Carly Urban, who is Professor of Economics at Montana State University. Excuse me 1 minute. Apologies. All right, so Dr. Carly Urban is a professor of economics at Montana State University and a research fellow at the Institute for Labor Economics. Dr. Urban's research is focused on how financial education and government policies affect consumer decision-making. In addition to publishing in peer-reviewed academic journals, Dr. Urban spends much of her time translating research for broad audiences, She has been a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve Board and the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Her work has been covered extensively by mainstream media, including NPR, The Washington Post, and The Wall Street Journal. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a BA in economics and international affairs from the George Washington University. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Urban.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today and to kind of build off of what Amy was talking about. And I want to take a second before I really get into the research and the data to tell you just who I am. And a lot of this was in my bio, but I want to make it really clear that I've been doing this type of research since 2012, since before all these states were really adopting financial education policies when there were only a few. So it's been really fun to kind of watch that evolution and to really see what the benefits and maybe the costs are to requiring financial education in high school. I'm not advocating for any type of policy. I understand that there are unique contexts, and we'll get into a lot of that later, but I will be talking a lot about what the specific research says, which is mostly looking at what happens after one of these mandates turns on. Great. Okay, so I'm going to start out just telling you a little bit more about why financial education in general is important, especially for young adults. I'm going to tell you a lot about the research and what happens after school-based financial education is put into place. So after requiring financial education in high school in particular. And if you remember nothing else, there's really, really clear findings. So financial education in high school improves both debt and credit behaviors for a really long time in the future. And it's especially helping people from lower income families. So those young people from the lowest income families with their long-term financial behaviors. So we do see these improvements exist up until age 40, which is a really long time. It's not really affecting the savings, income, or educational attainment side of things. So financial education isn't really giving people more money, which is kind of what we would have expected, but it is really helping their financial behaviors. And then after that, after I kind of go through the research, I'm going to talk to you about just the landscape of high school financial education, both in Washington and nationally, and how that's kind of evolved. And particularly, I'm going to talk about equity and access. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit more about financial education in general, not just in this high school young adult space. And the big takeaway there is it does improve financial behaviors in a very cost-effective way. Okay, so now that I told you everything I'm going to tell you, I'm going to kind of get into the weeds a little bit. So as most of you know, financial literacy is really important, especially for young people as they're about to gain their financial independence. We know that they're about to make some really important financial decisions that will really affect the rest of their lives. So young people are thinking about things like, should I go to college? Where should I go? How am I going to pay for it? How do I protect myself against future emergencies? How do I pay taxes? How do I make borrowing decisions in the short and the long run? What kind of job should I take? So all these really important questions that they're maybe not well equipped to answer. And in particular, we know that young people are not good at really making these decisions with very limited financial information. So if we give them kind of this very basic financial literacy quiz of 3 questions, about a quarter of 23 to 28-year-olds can correctly answer those. And these are very simple questions on interest, diversification, and inflation. So very basic, true, false, multiple choice type questions. And a lot of them just don't know the answers. We know about half of student loan borrowers didn't actually calculate any future monthly payments before they actually picked which loan they were going to choose. And a lot of them afterwards have a substantial amount of regret with that decision. And then finally, one of the most important pieces in my mind is that a lot of young people are using alternative financial services like payday loans, and they're getting themselves into these very tricky cycles of debt. So almost 40% of 18 to 34-year-olds have used that type of device in the last 5 years. That's a very high number, and we know that that is not consistent with setting young people up on really strong financial footing. Okay, so if there's not enough information for young adults to make really important decisions, and we know that in the absence of more education, we have these really negative financial behaviors early in life, then financial education in high school is one way to kind of universally reach students and kind of try to improve these behaviors. So Amy talked a lot about what financial education looks like in high schools. I always say it's important to know what happens in these classes, because people who are removed a little bit more, less so this group, I always think it's going to be some boring annuity discussion and like these very entrenched in retirement decisions or very finance heavy curricula. But actually, these are things that we can think about for pretty much anyone. So creating a budget, saving for emergencies, how credit cards work, thinking more about saving and investing a little bit, and kind of like insurance decisions, things to kind of protect you from future unpredicted shocks. How credit cards, how credit scores are constructed, and then more of like comparing very long-term debt obligations. So that could be a student loan, that could be an auto loan, and just trying to figure out what makes more sense. Okay, so things that are going to be very relevant if they aren't relevant immediately for young people. We want to think about inoculating them against all of the things that are going to come at them, all the fraud and scams and the buy this now consumer mentality that we see with all the apps these days. And we want to kind of protect young people from all of these things instead of, trying to cure them after they've run into a lot of trouble. Okay, so when we think about the research space, a lot of the research in the US looks at what happens after states require personal finance in high schools. So this means that it can be required as a standalone course or within some other curriculum. So sometimes that means social studies at large, sometimes that means economics. It could be in American government sometimes, but this is personal finance content within the standards required for graduation, okay? And the reason we look at requirements in the research is because it's the most common policy, and it's the easiest way to compare states or students in states before and after these requirements went into place. So we know that the access to financial education has increased dramatically, and we use that as kind of a natural experiment where just by chance, one sibling might have been in high school and not had to take anything, and then a slightly younger sibling is going to have personal finance content, okay? Now, this doesn't mean that this is the only lever, and this absolutely doesn't mean that it's the best lever either. It's just the one that's been studied the most. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So after this requirement goes into place, delinquency rates fall and credit scores improve. So this is using really big data from the Federal Reserve Board that looks at all Equifax credit reports for young people, huge samples. And we're really finding these giant improvements in credit and debt behaviors. Now, I think it's important to fine-tune this a little bit. So that first cohort that was required to have some personal finance content before they graduated from high school, that first graduating class affected by the policy change, didn't actually see an improvement in credit scores and saw a small decrease in 90-day delinquency rates. Now, as an educator myself, I know that I am not the most efficient instructor the first time I'm teaching a new course. So this could be somewhat teachers readjusting and really kind of figuring out their footing and making sure they're teaching this effectively. Because by the second cohort, we see that the increase in credit scores goes up by 16 points. And delinquency rates fall by about 3.5 percentage points, which are quite large effects. And then those nearly double for the third cohort. So again, some of this could be teacher learning. It could also just be that schools take a while to actually adapt to the new requirement, and maybe everyone didn't actually do it right away. There could have been a lag in implementation in some way, which we actually see quite commonly in states that add these policies. But by that third cohort, we're seeing really large effects where there are great improvements in both credit and debt behaviors for young adults. And this is through age 22. This isn't just immediately. This is for years after they were required to have the class. Okay, so this is kind of big picture overall effects. Now we're going to look at some other outcomes. So one other mechanism we think that financial education in high school might be improving is student borrowing. So this is post-secondary education. We're looking at first-time students and what their initial borrowing packages look like. And we see this great shift from high-cost to low-cost borrowing methods. So what does that actually mean? It means that applications for aid are increasing. Students are more likely to take out student loans that are federally subsidized. Okay, so they're taking out more of the Stafford loans. We know that lots of Stafford loans do not actually accrue interest while you're in school. And that's the largest mechanism we're seeing kind of this improvement in. So maybe students were actually under borrowing. We also see that students are more likely to have a grant or scholarship, which we can think of as free money in a way that they don't necessarily have to pay back. Well, they definitely don't have to pay back. There is some upfront cost to actually applying for grants or scholarships, but again, probably an improvement. The biggest thing in my mind is that students were less likely to carry a credit card balance. So this is a huge change. Lots of students are actually financing their college education on a credit card. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily paying their tuition on their credit cards. It means they're probably under borrowing on their student loans where they don't have enough money for food, transportation, lodging, other expenses, maybe their books, and then they're racking up credit card debt while they're in college. So financial education is actually helping them to better calibrate their budgets so that they're able to make better decisions. Now, we also find that it does reduce private loan balances for those who were borrowing from private sources as well. Now, I think one of the most interesting parts of this study is that we find that the effects are largest for the students that are from lower income families. This means that students who have families with very low expected family contributions are seeing the largest increases in getting a subsidized loan, getting grants, and the largest decreases in carrying a credit card balance. And they're also less likely to work while they're enrolled, which I think is a really important finding because other researchers have found that when lower income students are working while they're in school, they're less likely to complete their education. And we know that student loan repayment is hardest for those who don't actually finish their college degree. Okay, for the students from higher income families, we are still seeing an effect, but it's largely that decrease in taking out private loans, and they're switching to public loans, right? So probably a smart decision, especially because of all of the extra policies centered around public student loans, whether that be income-based repayment or lower interest rates in general. The possibility of forgiveness, depending on which occupation you choose. So we do think that that is also a smarter decision. Now, there's been some follow-up work by a scholar at the New York Fed who found that student loan repayment actually increases for those students who are required to have financial education in high school. So this is an outcome really like 10 plus years down the road. And it's particularly true for those who were first-gen students, so first person in their family to go to college, and students who were attending public schools. So again, students who we expect to potentially have the greatest benefit from financial education are those who have an increased repayment rate way down the road for their student loans, which is also very exciting. So in another work by Melody Harvey at the University of Wisconsin, she looks really carefully at payday lending. And as I said earlier, alternative financial service use and payday loans in particular are a really scary debt trap that young people get into frequently. And we think financial education could help them to maybe build up a little bit more emergency savings so that they aren't necessarily in the situation where they need a payday loan. And she actually finds that after financial education is required in high schools, high cost borrowing like alternative financial services does decline. And this isn't just for the overall everyone. This is for every type of group she can kind of split this by. So she looks at underrepresented minorities. She looks at women versus men. She has a few more splits in the paper, but pretty much is affecting everyone about the same. And it's really reducing payday loans across the board. So again, this is a really strong picture that financial education in high school is a really good way to kind of reduce that debt poverty trap that you might see just naturally come up. In another study, we looked at subjective financial well-being because it's awesome if objective outcomes improve, but at the same time, we want people to kind of feel better potentially and feel like they have the power to make decisions. And we do find that financial education does improve financial well-being overall. But that said, this is through age 40. So this is a very long run effect. The people that it's helping the most are men and people who have at least some college. And at the same time, people who ended their education with a high school diploma actually have lower subjective financial well-being. So at first, we see this result and we're scratching our heads, puzzled, and we're trying to think why this happened. But when we looked at more of the details within the scale, we saw that the biggest difference is that people who ended their education with a high school diploma were much more likely to say that they will never have the things they want in life because of money after they had financial education. So that tells me that their expectations, their preferences, they never changed. If they wanted to, have a fancy house and a yacht or some like lavish expectations, they know that that's not in their future. And that might be something that they remember regularly and makes them feel a lot worse about their situation. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's hard to say. But it does make you think that while we're teaching in these financial education courses, we need to be very cognizant of who our students are and the best ways to reach them and not just maybe like squash their dreams. Okay, now I told you all of these potential benefits that we document in the research on what financial education does. I think it's really important to know what financial education doesn't do. So there are a lot of things that it does not change. The first thing is it doesn't change any retirement savings, investment, or home ownership outcomes. So people are not investing more. They don't have more money in retirement accounts. They don't have more money in taxable investments. They're not buying a home sooner. They're not buying a different type of home. We're not seeing any changes along this dimension. And for me, that's not surprising because the education in itself isn't going to just give you more money. You might see these, stronger financial footing outcomes that are, really suggesting better credit and debt outcomes that they might kind of translate into having a better mortgage contract or, being able to buy earlier. But I think so many of these outcomes are preference-based and tied to employers, and particularly retirement savings, that we're not really seeing anything on these dimensions. So if we're looking to boost investments or retirement savings, this probably isn't the lever. It's probably too early to talk about it in high school. Depending on who your students are, that might just seem so far off that, they tune that part out. This is probably a better outcome, but financial education doesn't actually change high school graduation rates. I've heard people say if we had financial education in high school, then students will be more engaged and they'll understand the costs and benefits and the trade-offs of the importance of education more, but we don't see anything like that. So no students are more or less likely to graduate on time or be on track for high school graduation. So I'm not worried about this. This is maybe a good thing if we're adding a standalone course requirement and we're really worried about what's going to happen later. We're not seeing that students aren't making that, especially by student characteristics. So we're not seeing it for white students, for Black students. We actually don't see anything for students from low income families being more or less likely to graduate or graduate on time. So I think overall that's a good thing. But that said, this is estimated from states that require a full semester of personal finance education, and all of those first 5 states got rid of something when they added it. So they're not adding an additional burden. Okay, so we have to think really carefully there too. So in addition, requiring financial education in high school doesn't change income, college attendance, college completion. So where students go to school, part-time versus full-time, in-state versus out-of-state, 2-year versus 4-year, or any of these educational attainment outcomes are not affected by financial education. And again, this could be because it's maybe often too late. It often happens in senior or maybe late in junior year of high school. And if you've talked to a lot of young 16, 17, 18-year-olds, they often have a really strong preference on where they want to go to school or the type of school that they're going to already. So there aren't many students on that margin where they're trying to make that decision. And regardless, financial education isn't tipping them one way or another. And on the income side, we think students are largely fixed on what their preference is for what their future job might be. So we don't see a lot on that dimension either. Now, in some states, like in Montana, personal finance has been offered in many schools, but not required. And we looked at what happened there. And the answer was largely nothing. There were no really positive outcomes to just offering it. But this is, again, a unique setting. And I think there have been a lot of issues where students that were selecting into the personal finance courses were students who were just interested and had learned a lot from their parents already, and they were probably going to be fine regardless. So we have to be really careful about marketing classes to the right students who stand to benefit the most. Okay. So I want to take a step back and say, let's just look at what's happening in local high schools across the country. So over the last 4 years, I've built a team of research assistants, and they've gone around to every high school in the entire US to their online course catalogs and figured out what they're doing in terms of personal finance coursework. Is it required? Is it a standalone course? Is it embedded in another course? Is there nothing? And overall, we found that in these 10,600 high schools, 1 in 4 students are in schools that require a personal finance standalone course. So that's quite a few. And that's largely because of some state policies, but not entirely. A lot of states have schools that are requiring them even when they have no policies. If we look at Washington, the most common personal finance policy is that there is a standalone elective. So personal finance is offered in almost 2/3 of classes of schools as an elective. And then in another 25% of schools, it is embedded in another class. So there is an elective course that has personal finance content, and there's only 7% of schools where there's no content whatsoever. And this is as of the last academic year, so it could be a little bit updated this year. Very few schools have requirements of some sort, but there are some that have a standalone requirement or a required class that includes personal finance content. Now, to me, this isn't surprising, especially based on Amy's presentation, because it seems like the Washington model has been more along the lines of really training teachers and spending time investing in providing quality financial education and not just, broadly sweeping all the schools. I think what will be really important is to reach the students who we know stand to benefit the most from financial education. So along those lines, nationally, when there is not universal access, so when there is not a standalone personal finance course requirement and every school in the state requires every student in the state to take a full semester of personal finance, we see a lot of inequities pop up. So the first inequity is that schools that don't have graduation requirements tend to be higher poverty schools. So they have more students on free and reduced price lunch. So students, again, who stand to potentially benefit the most based on the research are those with the least access. We also see disparities in access based on race and ethnicity, where schools that are predominantly white, or have predominantly white students, are more likely to have, again, that universal access. The standalone requirements are in schools that are more affluent and more white. Okay, so I think really building on those inequities, we need to make sure that the access piece is consistent and that students who stand to benefit a lot from financial education are those that are getting the right access to financial education. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the costs. I wouldn't be an economist if I wasn't obsessed with costs as well as benefits. So the first is about teacher preparedness. We know now that over time, this has increased dramatically. And if we look at a random sample of teachers in high schools, some of these may be credentialed in ways where personal finance would be a natural fit, and others are teachers from other disciplines like English or French or other kind of out of discipline specialties. And across the board, all teachers seem pretty confident that they're prepared to teach personal finance content. They are less excited, less confident about teaching investment or taxes, which is maybe not completely out of the realm of possibility, right? Makes more sense. And maybe those are not the most high return topics anyway, depending on where our students are starting. Research also shows now that there are benefits to teachers. So teachers that were randomly assigned to teach a new personal finance class in high school were actually improving their own finances afterwards. So this is kind of a super interesting and fun finding, and particularly because they like to learn at that level, right? They thought that the financial education available to them as adults was actually too advanced. One other thing I want to mention with respect to costs is just obvious opportunity costs. Students are giving up something, and we know that teachers are underpaid and overworked. So we have to be really careful about thinking about those costs as well. There's one really important takeaway from the research in terms of potential costs and unintended consequences. And that's that research says that you shouldn't put it in math. Financial education is not designed for math in the same way that other topics might be. So the stories are really what's most important for learning. And without kind of clear stories, students have a lot of trouble with financial education. So there's been a lot of talk today about K through 8 and then K through 12. There is one great meta-analysis, which is just a fancy way of saying, let's put all the studies together on something. And they look at all the experimental studies on financial education. And they show that elementary school has really high effects of financial education as well as middle and high school. So it's not just high school that is, the only place for this. It's just that that's the most common lever in the US. Elementary school financial education looks very different. So they're not learning the same things that I talked about earlier on. They're building more of classroom economies and learning things like, if I eat all the cupcakes today, I don't have any cupcakes left for my birthday party tomorrow. So again, it's still financial education, but it's very different financial education. Now, if we take a step back and just look at all financial education interventions across the entire life course, they are largely effective at improving financial knowledge and behaviors across many domains. This is like 78 studies across the entire world, and the interventions are pretty cost effective. So I'm going to step back and do one, tell you about one quick experiment that's my favorite in here. That is a South African soap opera that includes financial education. And there's a big poverty and debt trap. And people were more likely to call into the poverty line, to this get out of debt hotline, after they were randomly assigned to watch this soap opera. And it was really, really effective in changing people's behaviors and really getting them out of debt. So I think being innovative around financial education is very important, and thinking about where we can kind of intersect financial education into the popular world. Some quick parting thoughts. I think it's really important for young people to learn how to avoid costly financial mistakes, to choose better loans, and to build their financial futures and really strengthen their financial lives. And high school is one place where we know that we can meet people where they are. So we have to be careful about designing policies for that to be the most effective. Excellent. So here's some contact information if you want to reach out to me more directly, and yeah, read more about financial education.
Thank you so much, Dr. Urban. Let's give it up for Dr. Urban in the reactions below by sending those clapping emojis. So thank you so much, Dr. Urban, for joining us today and sharing with us the research that is out there. I am going to go ahead and take us to our Q&A section, and let's see if we have any special questions for Dr. Urban. We see one question from Mike Snow. We may go ahead and it may be best fitting to address this question during our panel. So I think we're going to save that. With that in mind, we're going to go ahead and just save that question. But if there are no other questions for Dr. Urban, we're going to go ahead and keep on moving. Thank you so much, Dr. Urban. And I'm going to hand it off to our amazing Amy Cleaver to speak to us all, joined by our panelists. Oh, Amy, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you, Dr. Urban. I was so excited when she agreed to be the keynote speaker, because I feel like it's so important to look at financial education, as we talked about at the beginning, and kind of break away from what we think it has to be or what it traditionally has been, and really looked at a holistic, data-driven approach to what will work for this new generation of students. So with that in mind, we're also going to go to our panel now, and I'm so excited to be joined by this powerhouse group. We have Minda Michelle Maddox, Julie DeBolt, and Ashley McGirt, and we're going to go ahead and just go into introductions one at a time, if nobody minds. Do I move? I'm just going to leave the screen. I'm going to let somebody else handle this part. So I'd like to start with Minda. She's first on the list there. So we will go with, hello, welcome. Minda Michelle Maddox is a lifelong educator. She has taught and facilitated workshops for all ages for over 30 years. Minda Michelle presents on topics closest to her heart: financial wellness and equity and social justice. Her passion is that people of color be well-versed in matters of personal and business finance. She works to ensure that communities of color have the tools and resources to build generational wealth. So welcome, Minda. I don't know if you would like to introduce yourself briefly, and I would love to hear what was your experience with financial education as a student?
Good morning, everyone. Hi, Amy. Thank you for the intro. So I work for Washington State Employees Credit Union. I am one of a team of 6 people who bring financial education to our territories around the state. My territory is South King County. The question was my experience with what?
Well, what was your personal experience as a young person? What was your experience with financial education? Did you receive any?
So my recollection is I'm a product of the Seattle Public Schools, and my recollection is one guest speaker in I think it was my history class actually, from a bank in my junior or senior year of high school. And the person talked about investing. And that's the entirety of my recollection of my K-12 experience with
So
financial
interesting.
education.
And can you tell us a little bit about how you came to focus on financial coaching and financial wellness now?
So I have been a trainer, an educator, a counselor for all of my career. And I have always incorporated some kind of financial education because I am the daughter of an immigrant. My mom was from the Philippines. She's a retired Seattle school teacher. My dad's, poor from the South, Black family. And so I grew up in a house with our family coming over from the Philippines constantly. There were at one point, there were 14 of us in the home. And so, finances became important to me when my twin and I found out our senior year of high school that our parents didn't have money to pay for college. And I blamed it on my Filipino family because mom was always bringing them over and sending money to the Philippines. But I want to keep it short. Yeah, that's the crux of it. Why I always incorporate financial education in whatever I'm doing.
Wonderful. Love it. Thank you. Next, we have Julie DeBolt, who is the Executive Director of Student Learning for the Auburn School District. She leads over 15 areas of responsibility for 24 schools and nearly 18,000 students. This is her 27th year in education and 16th year in her role at the district office. And Julie is dedicated to promoting success for every student and actively strives to comprehend and remove institutional, structural, and economic obstacles that hinder children's opportunities. So welcome, Julie. Would you mind telling us a little bit about your experience with financial education as a student?
Absolutely. So I'm a product of the Auburn School District. I haven't left home and did my K-12 experience there as well. In junior high, I got to participate in an activity that was around investing. We got to do a stock market challenge. So that was really my first experience with financial education and learning a little bit about investing. I convinced my parents to allow me to move money out of my savings account into an investment account, which sat there for over a decade, but I used that to purchase my first home in my early 20s. So I had a very positive experience, but it was limited to those students that participated in one particular course.
Wow. Well, it's a great story on the power of financial education as well. Thank you. All right. And then we also have Ashley McGirt, who is the founder and CEO of the Therapy Fund Foundation. She is a psychotherapist, a TEDx international speaker and author who has been featured in Forbes, MSNBC, the Huffington Post, and more. And Ashley currently serves as the NAACP State Area Conference Health Chair. So Ashley, do you want to talk a little bit about your role in your organization and then maybe share what your experience was as well with financial education in school?
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, I'm the CEO and founder of the Therapy Fund Foundation. I'm also a mental health therapist, which is what really led to me creating the Therapy Fund, because many people could not afford therapy and people were coming to therapists to work for free. And, many of us have hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loan debt, and it's just not financially smart for us to be able to work for free. If there was a way for me to sustain my life and still do that, I absolutely would, because I love this work. And so in creating the therapy fund, it was a way for community members to receive free therapeutic services, as well as clinicians to be paid a market level and adequate rate, because we know insurances often offer low reimbursement rates and expect us to do all of this work, a lot of labor. And I'm a product of the Highline and Auburn School District. So I spent elementary to middle school in the Highline School District. I went to Sylvester Seahurst Elementary, and then I graduated from Auburn High School because, of course, my family wanted to move when it was time to go to high school. I was supposed to be at Highline, but I digress. So I say all of that to say my experience was quite unique, as I received a lot of financial education in school, and I didn't realize that this wasn't the norm until I got older and I had conversations with my friends, my peers. Me and my husband are often talking about this. He grew up in Flint, which is night and day, predominantly Black neighborhood, poor, where I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood. And I learned a lot about, saving, budgeting, writing checks, but I didn't get that in the home. I remember being in middle school, coming home like, oh, I want to open up a bank account. My mom just opened up a bank account 8 years ago because she doesn't trust the banking system. And that's a whole another conversation that we have to have about being Black and what it means to be Black and bank. So there's still a huge distrust, but I was getting the education in school and I'm like, we need a bank account. I need to write a check. But now it's like, who's writing checks these days? Is that a lost thing? I still have a ton of checkbooks. But yeah, so that's what my education looked like. I remember being in DECA, FBLA, Future Business Leaders of America. And we went on trips and we had to save money and budget and talk about what that looked like. I remember we went to New York and all of these different things. We were actually supposed to take a big trip to Egypt in middle school, but then 9/11 happened. So all of that money that we raised, and then we had to talk about, okay, we accrued this money, so now how can we divest these funds since we can no longer travel to Egypt with what happened? And so these were conversations that we were having, fortunately, in my elementary and middle school, and then later in high school, based on the clubs I participated in.
That's amazing. I love the wide range of experience we have, lived experience within this panel as well, which I think is going to be great for this conversation. So I want to just start off by asking all of you, for anybody we have not convinced in this audience yet, why should Washington invest in financial education for our students? And Julie, you're unmuted, so I'm going to go ahead and let you go first on that one, if you don't mind.
I think it's really important, financial education for all students, for every student, starting at elementary, because it really can reduce vulnerability to exploitations throughout, as soon as students start having funds, right, which could be a very early age. It can promote wealth accumulation. That knowledge base is really critical. My experience, like I said, I just sat on something and it earned money without me doing anything. And it breaks that cycle of poverty. And coming from a district with over 50% free and reduced lunch rate, financial education for every student can help break that cycle of poverty. So I think it's really important as a whole state that we look at it. And in the context of equity, right? So we've heard a little bit about that here from our panelists today, and probably some more, but we have so many examples across the state of Washington of financial literacy inequities, real estate inequities, banking inequities. And it's really our responsibility as educators to break those systemic cycles of inequities. And to help our students and families understand what those inequities are and how they can challenge those to break the cycles.
Love that. Minda or Ashley, would you like to add on anything to that one?
I would encourage people to look at what is the cost of not investing into financial education. And so, we're talking about that. And how does that add to the school to prison pipeline and all of these other things and the detriments if we do not do this work?
Absolutely. So moving right into the issue of equity, which is something we have at the core at FEP is that we want to make sure all of our materials are inclusive and accessible to all students. So let's talk about equity in financial education, because we've seen from the research side, right, that inequities exist. Julie just mentioned some of them. So like Minda, when I say equity in financial education, what would that mean to you?
For me, it means being aware that a lot of times, my experience as a financial educator, when I see other financial educators talk to whatever the audience is, whether it's young folks or on up to seasoned folks, they start at savings and credit. I have lived a lot of my life, because I've been in the service industry, paycheck to paycheck. The communities I come from, folks live paycheck to paycheck. So don't talk to me about savings when I'm living I don't have anything to save, right? And so for me, equity means, let's talk about the trauma of money. Let's talk about your mindset growing up and your experiences growing up with money. Let's start back there. And then, especially nowadays, because there's so many ways to make money online, there's so many great side hustles, if you will. Then let's talk about other streams of income. Somebody put in the comments something about trading time for money. Let's talk about entrepreneurship. And I'm talking about all ages. My 84-year-old dad is asking me to show him some things around entrepreneurship. So for me, equity means, let's start where whoever the client is, or the student or the family, or let's start where you are. And if that's behind the mainstream starting line, which is savings and credit, if my starting line is, how do I even make enough money to budget? Let's start there.
Right.
That's equity to me.
I love that. And so I really think that kind of leads into, what can we do? We're talking about starting conversations. I think you're talking about starting a conversation that hasn't traditionally been started. I know you mentioned in your family, I think mentioned during our conversations, and please feel free, those of you in the audience, if you want to share a reaction, if this resonates with you. I did not talk about money in my household growing up. That was actually something that we were encouraged to really kind of not talk about. And it was sort of this assumption that in polite company, you don't talk about finances, right? And we're sitting here really advocating flipping that script. We're sitting here saying, let's start these conversations. So how can schools create supportive environments for staff? Because I think this starts at staff before we can get to kids, right? How can we create supportive environments to start those conversations and have what can be, difficult conversations? Any thoughts on that? Let's call on Ashley. Hey, Ashley.
Put me in the hot seat.
I am gonna.
Yes, I would say we have to start those conversations in our own homes first. So starting there, having those conversations with self, doing our own work, whether it's investing in a financial coach, a clinician, really getting to the root of understanding your own financial trauma before you can take it anywhere else. Because we often have these conversations about how can we help communities and how can we bring it, outside, but we haven't actually done it in our own homes. So I think that's really the starting place is. So getting real with that conversation. What does money mean to you? What does finances mean to you? How does it show up? How does it feel in your body when you hear these words? That's extremely important. I listen to Tony Jones often. I wake up to Tony Jones. If you're not familiar with her, she has affirmations that are just really uplifting. And I bring her up because she has this affirmation playlist called Currency, spelled CURRENSEA. And essentially it says, all these words are used about money when it comes to water. And, we're 80% water. So aren't we the real currency? And so how can we show up in this world when it's all us? It all comes back to us and we are water. And it's really beautiful. So I think just starting with us and, how are we the currency that moves throughout this world?
Oh, I love that. And Julie, you actually went through this process, starting conversations with your teachers as Auburn rolled out this program this year. So how was that experience for you and for your district?
We've had fall and winter spring training series for a number of years in Auburn School District, and found that as an opportunity for teachers that can take up to 7 hours of online training each of those 3 windows. So in the fall, we worked with Amy and produced some training for our teachers and made that a requirement. If they were going to participate in the fall training series, they needed to start with financial education. I think that we saw in the chat, we shouldn't just assume that all of our staff are well educated when it comes to financial literacy and what it all encompasses. And I'll say personally, until I joined FEP, I really had a limited view of what financial education meant. And so I think having that access point for our teachers, we had over 500 participate in the fall training series. As an intro, we have the winter training series going now, and then we'll have one again in the spring. So providing that first level support for our teachers, and then providing them some resources too as well. So in elementary, just before the holidays, we purchased all of the books that FEP has for financial education for our primary age teachers to be able to use. We've put the books in library bags and inserted the lesson plans that have been developed by FEP. And so now teachers can check those out and use with their students during their lunchtime, as a substitute, quick plan, etc. Just that initial early exposure, and it's kind of low-hanging fruit, right? It's not a mandate. It's here's a resource that you can use, and it's in a great package for teachers, making it very accessible. So starting small has been our kind of avenue.
I love that. Thank you so much. So I want to go to a question from the audience here, which I think is a great question. We have a question from Jimmy that says, with the high cost of college, how do we best reconcile guidance to graduating seniors who want to further their education about taking on large student loan debt and being financially mindful? Let's see, Minda, do you have any? I'm going to put you in the hot seat on that one.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. So the question is, how do we repeat the question for me, please? Because my
no
mind
worries.
started.
How do we? You're good. How do we best reconcile guidance to graduating seniors who want to further their education about taking on large student loan debt and being financially mindful?
Yeah. So I was a college counselor at Garfield High School for all of my son, who's now 21, all of his growing up, all of his K-12 education. And I used to tell the kids, I'll say this, after having been a college counselor for 10 years, I now am of the mind that college might not be, a 4-year college may not be the best investment for us because of the cost of it. So what I would do when I was at Garfield was we'd always do the FAFSA and go over student loans and their packages and all that. And I would always say to the students, take the free money first. So I think Dr. Carly talked about taking Stafford loans, taking scholarships, grants. We did lots of scholarship workshops. I still talk about that today. And then if we must take loans, do the Staffords, right? And then I would talk to the students about other ways to be educated, not going directly to a 4-year institution. Of course, now we have the 13-year promise and some other ways that the young people here can be educated at least the first 2 years for free, thank God. And so we've talked about other trade schools, other forms of education. And I mean, now I haven't been a college counselor for some years now, and there's free colleges now. And so, and my own child is 21 years old. He graduated high school and started college in 2020 during the pandemic. He had a horrible first year college experience at Western online. And I allowed him to drop out of school. Me, the daughter of an immigrant who paid my own way through college, who grew up thinking college, I allowed my child to drop out because he is now educating himself in other forums and getting real life business entrepreneur education. And he doesn't have a 4-year degree, and he may never. And that's okay with me. And so when we talk to the kids, I'm sorry if I went off on a tangent. If we talk to our young people about alternative forms of schooling, I mean, if you're specializing like Ashley and Dr. Carly, yeah, of course we need a 4-year degree. There are other ways of making money that we may not need a 4-year degree. And we need to make sure that our kids know that a 4-year college education, if they don't go that route, that doesn't mean that they're going to lose in life. We need to make sure that they know that. I'm going to stop. I'm talking too much.
That there are other ways. What I'm hearing you say is that there's a lot of ways to invest in our human capital. And it doesn't have to be through that 4-year, accumulation of debt. There can be alternatives. I love that message. Thank you. I want to make sure we get to the conversation about how this rolls out. So Julie, I want to make sure we have time to talk about what approach. So Auburn applied for the grant, and I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in hearing, how did that go? How did you make the decision of where to allocate your resources? So would you mind sharing a little bit about your how in Auburn?
Yeah, it was perfect timing, actually. So we had our district strategic plan roll out at the same time. Each one of our really elevated topics was financial education, which came from our community, saying our students really need more financial education. So that became one of our strategic plan foundations, so foundation 2. In that foundation, we started with an inventory. What are we currently doing? And found that we offer standalone elective classes that just a small portion of our population takes. We have some 7th grade math standards that line up, but really we had pretty significant gaps when you look at a K-12. And when we talk about access and equity, you look at, there was a big gap there, right? So primarily our white and Asian students received that financial education elective, and our students of color were not participating in those types of courses. So once we received the grant, we talked about, what ways we can embed this and make it mandatory without adding another course, because we only offer 24 credits in our system. So we have a 6-period day. We didn't change that. A student misses one course, fails a course, has to take time off, they will not graduate on time. So that was one of our challenges, how we would make that fit. And we looked at our high school and beyond plan, which was already fairly robust. So students had milestones that they needed to complete every year, and they can earn up to a half credit per year in something called period 8. It's just a small 30-minute block time where students receive intervention and enrichment, but also complete their high school and beyond plan milestones. So we used our committee to determine which milestones in financial education students would need to complete. So starting with 9th graders, and this year it's 9 through 12, but starting there, every student has to participate and complete those in order to earn their high school and beyond plan for graduation. So we embedded it as a graduation requirement through the high school and beyond plan. Then looking at what we could build on in our middle schools, from there, we partnered with Junior Achievement and invested some of our funding for our teachers. They have to produce and work with 10 hours of lessons through Junior Achievement before students attend a field trip. So 7th graders now, every 7th grader gets those 10 hours of financial education lessons, and then goes to our finance park through Junior Achievement. At the elementary level, we let schools select 4th or 5th grade. 5th graders have lots of field trips already. So some schools selected 4th grade to be able to participate again in Junior Achievement through BizTown. And so we've had every student this year in either 4th or 5th grade will participate in BizTown. And then most recently is the adoption of the books that we have, those financial education books for K2. A fairly small cost when we look at the whole thing. We already had avenues to professional development for teachers. We had some avenues through the high school and beyond plan. So try to leverage those so it wasn't an add-on. And then looking, towards our future, what we'll do for expansion and knowledge. And that's really around our financial fellows who just attended a 2-day training and how they can go out and support our teachers kind of in a more sustainable manner through the future. And then one of the biggest pieces that was really truly dear to my heart is we have a large refugee community that's not coming from a e-commerce based system, our Afghan refugee families especially, and have been exploited coming here to the United States and don't have a full understanding. So we are planning 2 family events this spring for newly arrived immigrants, and we'll open that up to other folks as well. So kind of trying to look at the K-12 plus our family members and how we can support all.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that and for Auburn's commitment to its students through financial education. It's been inspiring to work with your district. And we're running out of time on the panel. I just have really quick wrap-up questions for each person. I could sit here and talk to these women all day, every day. I hope you all could sit and listen to it because it's such a fascinating conversation. Minda, I'm going to start with you. What you said really resonated about just kind of changing the script, flipping the script on what is, expected. Okay, I'm being given kind of a wrap up here as well. Can you just speak briefly on the role of community partners in bringing some of this financial education? We had talked a little bit about that.
Definitely. I know teachers have so much on their plates, and I would encourage schools, Julie, folks at your level on down to the classroom to contact your community partners. My team is statewide. We go all over the state talking about to anyone from schools to senior citizen centers to whomever invites us in. We talk about money. We do financial events. The rest of my team is across the state today, and I'm here with you all. The rest of my team is in Wapato doing a reality fair for one of the high schools. And so we do it, Boeing and